Hey, so we've been in this short little series called Habits, and I've loved it because it's been a time where I can reflect on maybe some of the patterns or the habits that I have in my life that I haven't really examined. And it's amazing how days go by or things go by and you don't really realize you're doing them. It's kind of like those of you who have a commute to work. And you get in your car and you drive there and you take you turn down different roads and you park your car and then you sit there, you get out of your car and you're like, how did I even get here? Like you've done this so much that you don't realize how you actually got to the place that your workplace or the place that you're traveling to, because it's just a part of your life. It's a pattern and you don't really have to think about it anymore. And so we've been working through that, and it's important to know the patterns of our lives and to examine these things, because habits are shaping us. They're shaping who we become and what we're going to do later on and the choices that we're going to make. And so the question that we've been asking ourselves throughout this series is, are our habits, are they making us more like Jesus or less like him? Are they helping us to become more like Jesus, or are they destructive? And are we becoming less like him because of those patterns and the things that we're not necessarily thinking about? And then last week, Pastor Aaron, he did a great job with talking about the maintaining those habits and the life-giving ones and making them a practice into our life, because habits, it takes practice, right? To gain that momentum and to carry it on. And so he did a great job touching base with that. And today, I want to kind of bring you to this idea. Remember we talked about the list of the death-bringing items in our life, so those bad kind of destructive habits. And then we looked at the life-giving habits. Now, from moving one to another, we talked about kind of dismissing or taking off one and putting on another. That's why we've linked clothes into this whole conversation. And something that really ties in nicely with that is choices. And that's kind of where we're honing in on today, is this idea of the choices that we make and where they bring us, and how the choices that we have in our life are shaping us. And so choices, it's very simple but huge for us today, because choices are gifts that God gives us. It's kind of like free will. You have the ability to choose whatever you're going to do that day, or whatever clothes you're going to put on. You have the choice of how your day is going to go, and you have the choice of how you invest your life for other people and for eternity. You actually have the power to choose how you're going to live. And are you going to choose the death-bringing list, or are you going to choose the life-giving one? And oftentimes we don't really think about it. We just go through our days. I mean, day after day, I commute to work, and I go to work, and I do my things, and I go home, and I might drive my kids. If I have kids, I might drive them wherever they need to go, or maybe I pick them up at school, and I make dinner, or I have dinner, and then the weekend comes, and the weekend is just like the last weekend, and it's all kind of rolled in the same, and life just ticks away, and it keeps going. But listen, you've got to wake up here, because the choices that you make, you don't just change happenstance. You have to make the choice to foster change and to develop new habits and new practices in your life, or else every day becomes the same as the last. And I think for some of us, the Holy Spirit's really been stirring us through this series and saying, here's some things that maybe you need to be giving up in your life, or here's some things that you need to be adding in your life in order to give life to others, and so that you in turn would grow and develop in your walk with Jesus. Now, I think for me, the place that I struggle with in choices is actually like making a bad choice. It's almost like sometimes I have choice fear. I have this fear of making the bad choice. And because of that, I don't make a choice at all. In fact, scientists, they have discovered that there is this thing called choice fatigue. So there's too many options available, there's too many choices available, and so you don't end up choosing, and you waste a whole bunch of time trying to figure out what's the best choice, right? Like you're in the cereal aisle, and you're like, should I choose Lucky Charms? Or should I choose Frosted Flakes? Or should I choose, and you spend like 5 minutes trying to choose a cereal, And it's like you're wasting your life choosing these things, and I am the worst for that. And so back in November, my family was on vacation, and we went to an outlet, and I was like, you know what, I'm going to buy a pair of shoes. If you know anything about me, I love shoes. I love buying a new pair of shoes and putting those shoes on. I think that's like a great feeling. And so I was going to buy these shoes, and I'm going like into different stores, and I'm trying to find the best price and the best looking shoe. And I'm like going store to store. Before I know it, like an hour has gone by. I'm trying to find shoes, and I've just wasted an hour trying to find them. And I can imagine the sales associate as I get to like the last store that I'm going into, or my wife for that matter, I get these shoes up, and I'm like, oh, should I get these ones or these ones? And or is this the best price? Or this is $2 cheaper than the last shoe I found? And the sales associate or my wife is like, pick a pair of shoes. Like do you want shoes or do you not want shoes? You don't have to spend this much time choosing a pair of shoes. Just put a pair of shoes on and let's go with it. I don't care if it's $5 more or $10 more. Just pick a pair of shoes, right? Because a lot of us struggle with that, and it's the paralysis of choices. Or I remember in college, some of my fellow students in college, I've shared this before, but some of my fellow students, they would, it was ridiculous. They would say, you know what, I'm just, God, where should I be going for dinner tonight? Should I go to McDonald's, God? Should I go to A&W? Should I go to the cafeteria at my college? Like, where would you have me go? And give me a sign to tell me which restaurant to go to. And maybe if I throw this blade of grass in the air and the wind takes it towards A&W, maybe I will go there for dinner tonight. And oftentimes I'm thinking to myself, God doesn't care where you go for dinner. Oftentimes I'm thinking to myself, he doesn't care what shoes I buy. Just make a choice and decide what you want to do. But I think oftentimes we're obsessed with that. And I think the older that I get and the more I develop my relationship with God, it seems like when I ask him the question, God, what would you have me do in this situation? I feel like more and more his response back to me, he's like, how do you want to invest your life, Ben? He says, you've seen me do things. You've seen me shape you. You've seen how I've provided in your life. You've read my word. You know my character. You know all about me. You've read my scripture. At the end of the day, make a choice that represents me well. And it begs me to ask the questions, are your choices based on your habits, or are they based on God's character? It's like my kids, right? My kids, they make choices, and I have to teach them through choices, right? Like, it is a bad choice to hit your brother with a play sword. It is a bad choice to kick over your brother's Lego that he's been building for 3 days. That's a bad choice. But there comes a point in time where all of my mentoring my kids, all of my building into my kids, there comes a time where my greatest joy is to watch my kids make choices themselves. Make choices themselves that represent the things that I've taught them well. And I think it's the same with God, right? He finds joy in seeing us make great choices that represent him well. And so today I want to draw your attention to John chapter 13. That's kind of where we're going to be camping out. And we're going to break it into 3 different segments. The first one I'll draw your attention to is John 13, 1 to 5, verses 1 to 5. And here's what it says. A great story here. It was just before the Passover festival. Jesus knew that the hour had come for him to leave this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. The evening meal was in progress, and the devil had already prompted Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, to betray Jesus. Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power, and that he had come from God and was returning to God. And so he got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing, wrapped a towel around his waist, and after that he poured water into a basin, began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. Now listen, I want to point something out about this passage. You'll notice what flew out to me is what you notice in there is that all authority and power had been given to Jesus, and Jesus knew that. Can you imagine that? All the authority and all, I don't know any human being who has all authority and all power given to them, but Jesus did. And he knew that. And yet look what he does in spite of knowing that, In spite of understanding that reality, he takes off his outer garment and he begins to wash the disciples' feet. Now, at the time, everyone's wearing sandals, all right? These sandals would, if you're wealthy or if you're a Roman soldier, they'd be made out of leather, but most of the time they're actually made out of leaves. So people would be walking around and they would be wearing kind of these flip-flop type of sandals made out of leaves. And the roads, there's no pavement, right? The roads are dusty, they're dirty, and when it rains in the rainy season, they were muddy and disgusting. People's feet would stink. They'd be full of dung and mud and dust, all kinds of stuff. And so when you got invited to someone else's house for dinner, what would happen is that host, they would have a basin of water sitting at the front door with some towels. And as you entered the home, it would be mandatory, basically, that you would take off your sandals, you would wash your own feet in this basin, and then you would go about your business. And in extreme situations, the host, as a sign of hospitality, would get a slave or a servant to wash the guests' feet before they entered the house. Never, ever would you have the owner or the master of the household wash the feet of their guests. In fact, in that culture, you would never have someone with high power serve someone in low power. You would never, ever see that. It wouldn't take place. And yet, this is what's happening. Now, Peter, we're going to see Simon Peter, he struggles with this concept of Jesus washing people's feet, and he doesn't want any part of it. And we'll check that out in verse 6 to 11. Here's what it says, verse 6 to 11. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" And Jesus replied, "You don't realize now what I'm doing, but later you're going to understand." "No," said Peter, "you shall never wash my feet." But Jesus answered, "Unless I wash you, you have no part with me." "Then, Lord," Simon Peter replied, not just my feet, but my hands and my head as well." And Jesus answered, "Those who have had a bath need only to wash their feet. Their whole body is clean. And you are clean, though not every one of you." For he knew he was going to be betrayed by him. And that was why he said not everyone was clean. And so Peter is saying here, listen, Jesus, you're not going to wash my feet. I'm going to wash your feet. And if you are going to wash my feet, right, then wash my whole body. Like, let's go take a bath. You wash my whole body, right? Like, you don't wash my feet, because I don't know if you've ever had your feet washed, but it is awkward. It's awkward to have someone else wash your feet. It really is. It's a humbling experience. It's kind of a weird sensation, especially when you're not expecting it, and someone's like, "We're going to do a foot washing today. I'm going to wash your feet." It's weird, man. It's hard to accept that happening to you. It's a difficult thing. And yet he's like, "Jesus, wash every part of me." And I think it's powerful what Jesus says here. He says, "I don't need to wash all of you because you've already had a bath." And what that's referring to is you've already been baptized. You've already been cleaned, but there's this part of you that is not, and it's your feet. And we need to clean your feet. We need to wash this dirty part of you. It's not the whole thing. It's just this part. And Peter's like, "I don't want this. This is too humiliating. This is too difficult. You are the master. I should be washing your feet. You shouldn't be washing mine." And I wonder how many times we feel God moving towards us. And he moves towards us, and maybe even today you feel like the grace of God or the power of God or the forgiveness of God is moving towards you this morning. The unconditional love of God is getting too close, and you say, "No. I can't have that. I can't handle that. I don't want that. It's getting too close for comfort." And listen, today you actually have the choice. Are you going to receive the ministry of Jesus, or are you going to say, "No, it's too uncomfortable"? See, oftentimes we think that it's easier to hide the deepest, darkest parts of ourselves. And it's better not to deal with those things because we don't want anyone else to see them. And yet I find it interesting is that it's at those places that Jesus comes to. And it's at those places that Jesus wants to clean. It's those places that Jesus knocks on the door. The dirty parts of ourselves. And we have a choice. Are we going to let him into those parts? And are we going to let him wash out those parts? See, the turnaround in Peter's life is that Peter lets Jesus minister in this way by washing his feet. Peter actually lets Jesus do that. And the turnaround in Peter's life is that Peter actually becomes the head of the church after Jesus dies. The head of the church. If you contrast that to Judas, right? Judas was there that night as well. And it says in the passage in verse 2 that the devil tempted Judas to betray Jesus. But Judas had a choice. He didn't have to betray Jesus, but the pattern of Judas' habits led him down a road of bad choices that ultimately affect his decision-making process. And even after he had made the deal with the high priest for 30 pieces of silver, Judas had the choice because the priest said, you know, Judas, you've been with Jesus long enough. You know his habits and Jesus' patterns of his daily life. You know where he's going to be. So Judas, you lead us to Jesus. And Judas made the choice to say, yes, I will. I will lead you to Jesus. And even at that moment, he had the choice to stop going along with the plan or to choose to continue to go down the road and the patterns and the death-bringing behaviors. And so why is that important? Well, I believe that there's people in this room this morning, there's people watching here today, that you've made choices that have brought you down a death-bringing road. And you've gone so far down this road, you've traveled so deep down this road that nobody else knows what they are. And sometimes when we get to those points, it's almost like we play the victim card and we say, I've made so many bad choices that I can't get out of where I find myself, and I'm going to continue down the road of bad choice. And here's what I want to say to you today. It isn't the end. Just because you've made a bad choice in your marriage, or you've made a bad choice in your family, you've made a bad choice in your career, in your relationship, just because you've compromised the integrity and the leading of the Holy Spirit in your life, and you've made decisions that are wrong, instead of choosing your way out of that, sometimes some of us have been, you know what, I can't choose I'm in too far, my marriage is ruined, my life is done, I'm struggling here. I want you to know that you always have a choice. And no matter how far down the death-bringing road you've gone, you can still choose to make a good decision in the midst of that. It might cost you something to come clean, yeah. It might cost you something to repent, to ask for forgiveness. But listen, you do what you need to do to get yourself out of a situation. And it might be hard, it might cost you something, but it will cost you a lot more in the long run if you keep choosing to go down the road of a death-bringing list. See, later after the deal is done, Jesus, he's crucified. He's hung on the cross and he dies. And the Bible records that Judas, he felt remorse. He felt sad about what he did. But notice that Judas never asks for forgiveness. And he never repents. He plays the victim card and he says, I'm too deep in this that I can't make a choice to get out of this. And he ends his life. And I wonder what would have happened in Judas' life had he asked for forgiveness about what he did. How would that change the trajectory of his life? See, you always have a choice to change, and it's never too late to make a good choice. Let's check out the last part of this passage here. It's verse 12 to 17. It reads like this. When he had finished washing their feet, he put on his clothes and returned to his place. Do you understand what I've done for you? He asked them. You call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for this is what I am. Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. I have set you an example that you should do as I have done for you. Very truly I tell you, no servant is greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. Now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them. And what Jesus is saying is learn to wash people's feet. But not only that, how can we make this go from a one-time event to a lifestyle of choice? How do you wash people's feet with your life? With your lifestyle? With your habits? With your practice? With your patterns? How do you do that? Well, sometimes I think God is like, yeah, I mean, it's great that you're asking me which job I should take, but just take a job. Or you're asking me how many kids you should have, just have kids. Or you're asking me, to help you with your exam at school and your test. And he's saying, these things are great to ask me, and you can come to me with anything, but let me tell you what is most important beyond any of those things is that you do each one with an attitude of serving. You do each one with a lifestyle of washing people's feet. What is the posture of your life? Because there's a big difference here between orthodoxy, which is really a belief or the right belief. I have good orthodoxy. I have upright and understanding what the patterns of the gospel are and what God's love for me. I understand my theology. I have orthodoxy. And then orthopraxy, you know what that is? Orthopraxy is the practice of what you believe. And a lot of us at church, man, we are so good about knowing all the right stuff. And some of you here this morning, you're sitting here thinking, yeah, I've heard this sermon. I've heard this type of idea. I've heard about Jesus washing people's feet. I know I should be washing people's feet. I know about good habits and bad habits. I've heard all these things before. And it's one thing to know them, it's another thing to put it into practice. And putting things into practice is hard. And it had to be so hard for Jesus, right? Here's this guy who's the Son of God. All authority, all power had been given to him. And here he is putting into practice what he knows to be true as he's arrested wrongly, as he's slapped and spit on, as he's flogged and mocked and carried through the streets, and as he's hung on the cross to die. Doing it all while practicing what he believes. See, what do the choices that we're making say about what we actually believe? And does your orthopraxy line up with your orthodoxy? It's hard. It's hard. But listen, the life-giving list, it doesn't happen without practice. And then if you practice great habits long enough, you know what they turn into? They turn into reflexes. And you just do them without thinking. Just like driving to your work and not even realizing how you get there, you don't need to think, it just happens because it's a reflex. And great habits can become a reflex, just like they were Jesus as he marched to the cross. And there becomes a point in your life where you say, you know what, this got to be priority for me. This is something I really need to do. And for you sitting here this morning or watching, this is what you need to do. I mean, one of the things that we do is we join life groups here. Life group is a very great way to live out great habits. To ask people, hey, can you pray for me? This is something I'm struggling with, and this is a practice that I want to get rid of, and this is a new one that I want to take on. And would you bring that up every week for me? Would you pray for me? Could we live this thing out together? And if you're not doing that, how do you ever expect to succeed in life-giving habits and turning those into reflexes in your life? See, reflexes are great because when you have life-giving habits as reflexes, you know what happens? Is you don't get yourself into dirty places in the first place. And so instead of walking around in bare feet, like I've been doing this whole message today, we can live out Ephesians 6:15 that reads like this. And with your feet fitted with the readiness that comes from the gospel of peace. And listen, some of you might have dirty feet today, and the gospel is quite clear. They don't got to be dirty anymore. And you've committed your life to Jesus, but maybe you have a small part that needs to be cleaned out, needs to be washed clean, and Jesus can do that for you today. And after that's done, he's saying, listen, put good practices, put good patterns, put good habits in your life so that they're reflexes. And when you do that, you're not going to walk through the puddles of life anymore. You're not going to walk through the messes and the dirtiness that you found your bad choices lead you to, because you're armed and you're fitted with the gospel of peace that protects you from the dirtiness of life. And that's where I'd love to be as a church. I'd love for you to find yourself in life-giving reflexes and life-giving habits. And that is my prayer for us as we take on this year ahead. And so here's what I want to do. I want to pray. It would be my privilege if I could pray for you today, and we could pray through some of this stuff and the habits and asking God's strength and fitting our feet with the gospel of peace that protects us from kind of the messes and the dirtiness of bad choices. And we could live this thing out, okay? So let me pray with you. Heavenly Father, I just pray for each one who's watching and gathered here today that, oh man, we just need your help. And God, those of us who have accepted you into our life, that we've heard the knock on the door of our heart and we've invited you in, God, Father, we just pray that you would just continually clean us. And there are some dark, messy places in our lives. And sometimes it's a humiliating experience to have someone else washing out those places. But God, we want to turn them over to you, and we want you to have your way. You would clean us out through and through. And God, that we could walk through this life fitted on our feet with the gospel of peace. We could live that thing out. And that the temptations of the world, the temptations of Satan would just bounce right off of it. And so, Father, I pray for strength. I pray for hope. I pray for peace. That we would live life out through your habits. In Jesus' name.